hammer comes down and beats you over the head for the rest of your life with a big national security stick. And so that people learn to duck their head and not speak up, because bad idea now.
This is the emergency broadcast system. This is not a test. Repeat, this is not a test. Citizens are advised to take the following steps.
Find us, armoroftruth.net.
In the age of technocracy, scientism, and pop atheism,
Faith is resistance.
Nietzsche, of course, announced the death of God and called for the birth of the Übermensch, the Superman, who would take humanity to new heights and to create a new world order.
Find us at the Armor of Truth YouTube channel.
This is not a test. Repeat, this is not a test.
Armor of Truth Live 248. Welcome to the Sound of Freedom channel, apparently. This is our second show in what has become a series. Will this be the last of the series? Well, that depends on what we find out after this, because it's coming fast and furious. And wow, here's the deal. What people are saying is, if you don't support the movie, something's wrong with you. In fact, you're godless. You're a godless liberal or something like that. Let's listen to this. Hang on now. There we go.
Praying to God and saying like, hey, how can I say this and not get upset and not get real hype? If you don't support Tim Ballard in the movie Sound of Freedom, me and you have nothing to talk about.
Oh, no.
Tim Ballard's like a big brother of mine. I talk to him on the phone. I text him. He calls me right back. He texts me right back. That's one of my heroes. He is sent from God. He is sent from the Lord to change the world. And you know what? That's why all these people are coming at him. Because when God sends you on a mission to change the world, people have to try to find something to tear you down. How could you tear this man down for saving children? How? Quit listening to everybody out there in the world say, oh, these Christians came with this movie, Sound of Freedom. They're cashing in, blah, blah, blah. What? Have you even seen the movie? Go see it. Go see it. But us who do support Tim, we need to send him prayers. I know he's strong. He's strong as a bull, but we need to send him prayers. We need to lift him up in prayer. Send him energy, because the world's trying to come at him for no reason. For no reason. Like I said, this guy will give you the shirt off his back. I know him personally. So Tim Ballard, this is your little bro Alec. I got your back, bro. I got your back. And if I ever see somebody post anything on my page, like, oh, the Sound of Freedom, I went and said blah, 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 I'm blocking you. If you have anything negative to say about Tim, I'm blocking you. And if you don't like what I'm saying, please block me and have a great day. God bless you. If you don't like what I'm saying, please block me. Tim Ballard, I love you. You're a hero.
Okay, let's don't block him. Let's not block him. But how about that? There's the message. The message is plain. The message is simple. That is, if you don't support the movie, if you don't support Tim Ballard, something's wrong with you, right? Because he's sent by God. That's what we're hearing here. Tim Ballard has a secret to tell, and actually he has lots of secrets. And I take no pleasure in this duty here, because as you know, this is a Christian media organization, Armor of Truth. And that places us typically on the right side, conservative Christianity. That's how we're viewed. A lot of you view this are there as well. But this is not about politics. This is not about left and right. There's a third way that's the right way, and that's to stand alone with Jesus. No matter what people are saying, right? If you don't support Tim Ballard, I got nothing to say to you. He said, well, is there any reason why we should not support Tim Ballard? Any reason at all, right? Is it all just made up? Well, we did a show last Friday night about this, about 3 hours long. This is not going to be that long. This is going to be a shorter show, and it's we're dealing with very specific claims, and it's got nothing to do with the mainstream media. Absolutely nothing. Nothing to do with that stuff. We're going to the source. For example, the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department Human Trafficking Task Force released a statement regarding human trafficking charities like Tim Ballard's Operation Underground Railroad. And it says this. You can't see that. There we go. Basically, it says human trafficking is a moneymaker for traffickers, of course, and that human trafficking is going to, at some point, eclipse the drug trade. Right? Now you hear that in the trailer to the movie. That seems to be reasonable. It seems to be true. But, it says here the Las Vegas Human Trafficking Task Force says, unfortunately, human trafficking has also become profitable for some seeking grant money and donations under the guise of providing services to victims. Wow. I didn't say that. That was a human trafficking task force that said that. I don't intend on giving you my opinion here. I'm sure that it'll come out. Let's just be honest. It'll come out. But I want to focus on showing you what has actually occurred. We cannot allow political or social movements presenting themselves as religious movements to influence our perception of the one true living God. And make no mistake, the movie, especially the movement behind it, promoting it, it is a religious movement. What influence does the Mormon Church have on the message of Sound of Freedom? Well, much more than you know. Let me just go ahead and give a shout out to Mino for sending this link over, so we have had access to more information than we even had last week. And more is coming out every day. But let's start off here. Now, Tim Ballard is certainly a Mormon, and Angel Studios, who produced the film, who's distributing the film. Let's put it that way. That's what they're doing. They've actually they raised $5 million in less than 10 days to distribute the film Sound of Freedom. And two brothers who are Mormons started that company, and that company, you'll see later on as we move through this, that the LDS Church has a lot to do with that organization as well. So that being said, Tim Ballard, the guy that evangelicals have got behind, they're promoting him, pushing him because of the movie, because of the story that they've been told about the man. Now, since it's a religious movement, let's focus in on Mormonism for just a moment. Mormonism is a false religion and a cult. They have completely different worldview than is presented in God's Word. From a book called The Word Matters, Defending Biblical Authority Against the Spirit of the Age by Dave Jenkins. You can find this book at g3men.org, G3 Press. He writes, the Mormon Church, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, the LDS, holds an unorthodox view of the Word. Mormonism teaches that the Bible is correct only so far as it is correctly translated and is considered basically trustworthy. Basically trustworthy. According to them, Mormons have 4 standard works in their religion. It is, first of all, it's the modified King James Bible, then the Book of Mormon, the Doctrine and Covenants, and the Pearl of Great Price, which includes something called the Book of Abraham, which is a burial instruction in ancient Egyptian that has nothing to do with Abraham. Interesting stuff. The 8th article of faith in Mormonism states, quote, we believe the Bible to be the Word of God as far as it is translated correctly. So then that opens up right? That opens up the necessity for someone to translate it properly to you. You've got to have the church. So that's no different than Roman Catholicism there. But in Mormonism, they further clarify that errors do appear in the original renders from the original renderings from the Hebrew and Greek. And the biggest issue is that within the delivery of the ancient text to the present day, they say, quote, many plain and precious things were taken away. What they mean is that the Bible cannot be understood apart from, quote, restoring other truths that were lost, hidden knowledge. So there's an element of Gnosticism. None of these works, the 4 big works we just mentioned there, according to their official church doctrine, is considered to be without error and without the possibility of error. So what good is it, right? As far as it's something that's being held in to be equal with the Bible. Furthermore, Mormons have an unorthodox view of Jesus Christ. They don't hold that Jesus, the Son of God, is one with the Father and the Holy Spirit. They believe Jesus is a created being and that God is a term for deified man. This warped view of the Trinity leads to a dangerous misunderstanding of the work of the second person of the Trinity, Jesus Christ. The atonement of Christ doesn't atone enough for the Mormon Church. They believe that salvation comes not only by the work of Christ, but by our work on earth, that we work our way toward godhood. So that ain't Christianity. So when we consider the teachings of Mormonism, we learn how they believe that extra books are needed alongside the Bible to provide clarity for their beliefs. Actually, the Bible provides a warning on this thing, to not add to the words or the meaning of Scripture, which is the now canonized 66 books of the Bible. You find that in Revelation 22:18, with that warning, don't add and don't subtract from the word or from the meaning of this word. The Westminster Assembly of 1646 states well that we believe the clarity of Scripture entails, quote, those things which are necessary to be known, believed, and observed for salvation are so clearly propounded and opened in some place of Scripture or the other that not only the learned, but the unlearned, the wise, and those who haven't studied as much, in due use of the ordinary means, may attain to a sufficient understanding of them. B.B. Warfield said, Christianity is summed up in the phrase, God was in Christ, reconciling the world within himself. Where this great confession is contradicted or neglected, there is no Christianity. Now, the purpose of this video is not to provide a complete apologetic refutation of Mormonism, but to address a couple serious departures that we just mentioned from the inerrant, inspired Word of God. That will give you more understanding and a more firm foundation from which to discern for yourself whether or not this movement is worthy of the support it's getting, whether or not it's worthy of your support. And it can bolster you as a believer in defending the Scriptures against these same kind of attacks today. Now let's welcome the lovely Summer to the show. I caught you off guard, didn't I?
Yes, you did.
I meant to do that. No, I didn't.
You are fiery today. I'm excited for this one.
This is going to be a good one, and I've had to prepare for this and pray for this because I get too in the flesh, and I don't want that to happen. I want. You see, we don't dislike these people. We care about what's going to happen to them and their eternal souls. Tim Ballard, I don't know the man, but his fruits are evident. They're there. They can be his public fruits, anyway. Put it that way. So, and you have an opinion about Jim Caviezel, don't you? How do you? Well, how do you generally feel about his presentation?
Yeah, I don't think that. Well, there were interviews that I saw a few years ago, even after the Passion of the Christ, that just really sent up red flags, serious red flags. I feel that he doesn't show the fruits of a person that's following Christ, and we know, of course, that he's Roman Catholic, and so a lot of problems there. And once again, we see with this movie, with the way that Mormonism is being supported and the Roman Catholic Church and nominal Christians, that this is really an ecumenical movement, and it's very problematic.
Yeah, that's well said. That leads right into the next point here, which is just that. Jim Caviezel, as Summer has just said, is a Roman Catholic. That means that he denies the sufficiency of Scripture and holds to a false gospel where the Catholic Church is the possessor and dispenser of grace to humanity through the sacraments. And they have 7 sacraments. This is works righteousness. The idea that one has to maintain his salvation. In other words, you have to keep coming back to the church to get what? A fresh anointing. Fresh anointing. That's what the revivalist movement says too. But this is not Christianity. The person and work of Christ is the first essential doctrine of Christianity. If Jesus' deity is denied, that doctrine and version of God must be marked. It's got to be identified so that people can know. So when Tim Ballard and Jim Caviezel say that they're warriors for God, they're not talking about the same God. Those two men are not talking about the same God. Tim's talking about an idea of God, and Jim's talking about an idea of God, and they don't mix. So these two guys say they're warriors for God, but they don't even agree on who God is. All right, Tim is talking about a created God of which there are millions, just like him. And that God can save no one. Jim Caviezel is talking about the God of the Bible, but he believes a false gospel that cannot save. This is why we have to be very careful with movements like the one that's emerged around the movie Sound of Freedom, because make no mistake about it, whether the movie is entertaining or not is irrelevant. Whether it brings awareness to something or not is irrelevant. It is most certainly a religious movement, and a false one. And that's why we have to be very clear about this. You notice we're not doing a review of the movie, right? Because it's not really the movie that's causing this uproar. It's the people around the movie, and the message that they're giving, that they're proclaiming in the press. These men are prophets of their own testimony. So if you don't think this is relevant in a movement like the argument we're making here, if you don't think that's irrelevant, right, because the movie is what's important, and think again, Satan is most often subtle in his deceptions, and he seeks to soothe the ears of humanity with better versions of salvation. So beware. These people are confusing truth with error, and they're confusing the living God with a God of their own design. Ideas have consequences. False notions of the Savior have eternal consequences. False tales and fantasy human trafficking yarns told to either frighten people or to pull on your heartstrings have actually done damage to the so-called awareness about human trafficking.
Can I make a point?
Please do.
Yeah, I think also this thing about how graphic that they've been about what's happening with the kids is definitely by design, because what it's doing is it's traumatizing people, and that is very effective. I mean, it's a motivator to get overly emotionalized, to get hooked in, and then, okay, let me send my money here, let me give my money to this organization that it's questionable whether or not that's the place that you want to send your money. And hopefully we've shown you that.
I say don't do it.
Right. But it's defiling. It's defiling to people. And I'm not sitting here saying that this stuff doesn't happen around the world.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, that's clear. I'm glad you said that.
But this is one of those things where, just like they've done with movies and television and all of this, it's just, it's this process of defilement and desensitizing and traumatizing the culture and rendering people just sort of hopeless. There's also something to be gained that the devil, that Satan gains from this hopelessness that can happen, where people are just overcome with sadness.
Those are good points. Those are great points. And Summer didn't even see the outline to this show, and she's She's providing perfect segues into where we're going with this, because the religious movement that is underpinning this movement is useless. Not according to me. It's useless according to the Bible. We'll get to that in a minute. A former detective with the Detroit Metropolitan Police Department Human Trafficking Force. Now, we just gave you Las Vegas Human Trafficking Task Force. Now, here's the Detroit Metropolitan Police Department Human Trafficking Task Force said no information is better than wrong information. Now that's in reference to the movie, right? And not just the movie, but the stories about what happens, the stories that Tim Ballard is telling appear to not be true. You can decide for yourself. We'll present the evidence we have, and you can decide for yourself. You can do your own research. You can just take this for what it is. Fantasy stories like Sound of Freedom not only draw people's attention away from the truth, but it actually provides cover for actual criminals. You will hear us criticize, because we're taking this position, that we're covering for these criminals. I'm not going to say what kind of criminals, because it tends to kill the video when you use those words. But you know what we're talking about. Those kinds of criminals. So let's just get started in it. It's let's see, where do we want to go? Listen to this. Listen to a few of these headlines. Now, Angel Studios, let's see, that's $175 million pay-it-forward scheme and the astroturfing of Sound of Freedom. Astroturfing means creating it refers to how grassroots movements are movements that start from the ground up, from the people up. Well, astroturfing is when it's a false movement, like fake grass. It's a false movement that starts really from the top, and it's made to look like a real grassroots uprising. Let's see. The LDS Church is promotional. Has been known for having promotional movies. Operation Underground Railroad's Hookers from Heaven, Utah. Let's see, where are the other headlines here? Operation Underground Railroad attorney and firm Curtin McConkie helps LDS Church cover up certain crimes. And there's more in here about Tim Ballard and what he claimed about Earl Vinton Buchanan, which was the man that was supposed to be a character featured in the film, but was removed at the last minute because the film is fiction, folks. It's fiction, and if you depict a real person in a fictional movie, you're going to get sued. So they took his character out and changed his name. Tim Ballard has a relationship with Sean Reyes, Utah politician, and we'll talk about that. Let's see. That's probably enough headline. Here's another one here. The demise of Tim Ballard and Operation Underground Railroad. Let's just get into some of this. Now, once again, you can take this. You can take this as you will. But what we want you to know is the movement you're being sold as men who are warriors for God, doing God's work, is a false movement. In more ways than one. There's the religious manipulation that's going on, and then there's the fact that there's deception and lies behind the actual story. A growing number of former Operation Underground Railroad employees have been cooperating with investigators recently. And with the volume of work that Lynn Packer and many others have put into this story, before the movie ever hit theaters, this is a big point. The research that we're sharing with you here today is from 5 years before the movie. So this is not in reaction to the movie. These stories were out there for years before the movie was released. Now, so we're going to be using American Crime Journal, who's done a lot of investigation into O.U.R. And that's because some of the reporters live in Utah, where a lot of this has been centered. They have an intimate and direct understanding locally. So the stories we're going to be sharing with you are going to be stories from local news, local reports. We're going to share police departments who will not work with Tim Ballard anymore. American Crime Journal has produced 150 articles, more than, dozens of videos, more than 2,500 documents to tell this story. And the truth is there for anyone who actually cares to find it. You don't even need to read their articles to find the truth. There are news reports out there that you piece together the story and you come to find out that it's a big problem here. Tim Ballard has secrets. They're not really secrets anymore, though. It's important to note, Damian Moore from American Crime Journal, let me tell you, these reporters don't share our religious perspective or our political perspective. So in my opinion, it's good when you can find sources that don't necessarily agree with your worldview, that are supporting your argument. He says it's important to note that Tim Ballard and Operation Underground Railroad were riding high in 2020 with impunity, unchallenged. In the public sphere, they were legitimate. No one questioned their claims, and there was not a critic in sight. But that was the beginning of the end. This is when the stories began to emerge nationally. In 2020, Tim Ballard's organization, Operation Underground Railroad, found itself under criminal investigation. In fact, since the founding of O.U.R., Ballard and his organization have been the source of a steady stream of questionable and alleged criminal activity. You're not going to hear us talking about the QAnon claims or the adrenochroming claims and all that. We dealt with that a little bit in the last show. That's not what that's what the media is doing. We're trying to bring you the truth. O.U.R., from now on, Operation Underground Railroad will be O.U.R. because it's a big... O.U.R. was able to kill a federal grand jury criminal investigation that was probing the organization and its founder, Tim Ballard. Ballard's attorneys, which are the same attorneys that represent the LDS Church, by the way, Ballard's attorneys were paid more than $2 million from donor funds to stop the probe even before the FBI agents got to complete their investigation. In the meantime, the Utah film distribution company Angel Studios bought the rights to Ballard's movie Sound of Freedom, and since the release on July 4th to sold-out theaters across the United States, the heat has only been turned up. The LDS Church has been implicated in specific kinds of financial fraud over the decades, and more recently been implicated in human trafficking. The LDS Public Affairs Department was involved, or at least connected to, the leak of a confidential letter that shut down Davis County, Utah attorney Rawlings, this was the DA, District Attorney Rawlings' investigation into Operation Underground Railroad. Lynn Kenneth Packer is an award-winning investigative reporter, journalist, legal consultant, and author. Packer graduated from Utah State University with a degree in broadcast journalism, joined the Army, served in Vietnam from 68 through 70, and he also served as, in the service, he served as a television news anchor and producer for the Armed Forces Vietnam Network. Was awarded a Bronze Star for his work. After that, Mr. Packer reported for KSL Television News in Salt Lake City, Utah, for 15 years. Also taught journalism for 10 years as an adjunct professor at Brigham Young University and the University of Dortmund. Lynn Packer is also the author of a book called Lying for the Lord. That is the Paul H. Dunn story. So this gives you an idea of the kind of work that Lynn Packer has done before. This book documents the deceptions and excesses of one of the most beloved general authorities in the history of the Mormon Church. So see if this makes sense, to parallel to what we're saying about Ballard and this story that Packer wrote about years ago. Just showing here that he's got experience dealing with this kind of deception. Dunn was extremely popular among the Mormon faithful for his uncanny ability to tell gripping stories in general conference and firesides. Wrote over a dozen books where he told these stories and put out cassette tapes. And in these stories, he would talk about his time as a professional baseball player with the St. Louis Cardinals. He would talk about his experience as a combat veteran in World War II. The only problems were Dunn made up the stories. They were literally untrue. Dunn enriched himself by deceiving the people who loved and supported him. And Dunn used his fame and reputation to advance fraudulent business schemes. Even more disturbing, however, were the links that he would go to, that the Mormon Church would go to suppress, cover up, and kill any of this story. To anyone who tried, like Lynn Packer, who tried to report on Dunn's lies, they would shut it down. They used their vast financial and legal resources to just shut it all down. And in the end, Lynn Packer was fired from his job as a BYU professor for investigating, the untouchable Paul H. Dunn. His story was suppressed and covered at that time, contemporaneously covered a little bit once in an Arizona newspaper and in the Sunstone magazine. But outside of Vietnam and Utah, Lynn Packer's reporting has remained largely unknown until today. So let's start out here. We want to start out here with, here's a guy we're going to introduce you to. This is, what is this? This is Coach's Archives. Coach's Archives is a YouTube channel. And he says in today's episode, we give several major updates for Sound of Freedom. The media and the haters of the movie have spoken so many lies and mistruths. Today, Coach debunks every single lie. Well, not every single lie. You'll notice that he mostly focuses on the mainstream media stories about the movie. But let's listen to the first 20 seconds of this. And yeah, here we go. Sorry about that.
In today's Sound of Freedom update, we debunk all of the lies, but I gotta give you a warning. The world, the media, YouTube space, Twitter, wherever, it's full of self-aggrandizing people who are only trying to promote themselves. And when you do that, you are not getting to the truth. So I ask you in this video and in every video right here at Coach's Archives, look at the evidence presented and give me your feedback. And if I'm wrong, call me on it. This is going to be a big one. Sound of Freedom update time. Let's go.
All right, so that's what we'll do. I mean, I'm not going to contact Coach, but okay, we'll take some of his presentation and just respond to that, because this is another person who's saying, look, everyone who's talking about negatively about this movie has an agenda. Look, everybody on the planet has an agenda. The only question is it true or not? Okay, so let's start here at the 2-minute mark here, where are people gullible? Are people gullible or not? All right, let's listen to this.
And for all the haters out there, the people who hate this movie, there are a lot of you who are absolutely pure evil. This is going to make their heads explode. I promise you. And it's my hope that
we don't hate the movie, do we?
No, of course not.
We don't hate the movie. It's not, you can't hate a movie. That's ridiculous. But we have serious questions about the motives and about the validity, the truth of the stories that are being told. Let me just continue going. I don't want to get too sidetracked here.
This video and the information that I'm about to share with you guys will better equip all of us as we move forward and continue to fight for this movie. The first slide that we want to tackle comes right here, breaking news from Salon. And I thought about doing an expose on Salon because anybody who comes out with information about this, I think deserves to be exposed. However, it's a moot point, because there's no point in doing all of that research because it's plainly obvious the lie. And let's get into that right here. Look at the headline. It's Uncle Tom's Cabin, but for Q. Film spreading child trafficking hysteria is making bank. And I want to key in here on the subheading as well because this is a great mistruth. God's children may not be for sale, but box office hit Sound of Freedom is making a run on the public's credulity. Credulity means gullible. It means that you are willing to believe anything. Many times media likes to use big words to try to throw you off, and I'm not quite sure what that word means, so it must be bad, so this movie is bad.
Well, let's just ask a question here. Summer, are people gullible? Are people gullible?
Yes.
Okay, so is it possible for is it just at all possible? Is it conceivable in any way that Tim Ballard could be taking advantage of gullible people? Is it possible?
Of course it's possible.
So the implication here is that it's just not possible that anyone associated with this movie could be taking advantage of gullible people. Now, I don't agree with a lot of what this Vanity Fair article says. We shared this in the last show we did, but that's a poorly constructed defense of his position here. The Vanity Fair article provides a lot of the standard fare that you'd expect from the left. This is not what we're dealing with here today. We're not dealing with what Vanity Fair has said. We covered that in the last show, but we're going to talk about what Tim Ballard has been doing, and why are law enforcement agencies dropping out, not willing to work with them anymore. So let's jump ahead to another clip here. We'll try to move quickly today, if I can.
Ballard quietly left O.U.R. a week ago around the time the movie began breaking box office records. And I've seen that many times over where the attackers are saying, Tim Ballard left O.U.R., he got fired, he got thrown out. So all of this is discounted. I don't know what happened with Tim Ballard and why he left O.U.R., and I honestly don't care. He's still promoting the film every single day, and God can use anybody for good.
Okay, well, let's deal with that. Does it matter? He says, I don't know why Tim left O.U.R. and I don't care. Is that seeking the truth? Is that following the evidence where it leads? Does it matter why Tim Ballard left his organization? It does matter. It matters a great deal, because if he left his organization because the organization was under severe pressure because of his behavior, and law enforcement agencies are bowing out, don't want any more donations from O.U.R., then that matters. And we'll tell you why he left. We'll tell you what these problems are here. Just stay tuned. We'll get to that in a moment. But in August 2014, I'll give you a little hint right here. Tim Ballard and Utah Attorney General Sean Reyes announced that O.U.R. and the Elizabeth Smart Foundation were merging. This is just an example of why Coach needs to care about why Tim left his organization, why it matters, because Tim Ballard is being deceptive. I'm not going to call him a liar. I'm going to say he's definitely not telling the truth a lot of times. I guess that's a liar, isn't it? I guess there's no other word for it. That's what the Bible calls it, right? That's what the Bible calls it. So I guess we'll use the term. But this merger between the Elizabeth Smart Foundation, if you don't remember, Elizabeth Smart was a young lady who was held captive by a family for years. Was taken from her parents and held by another couple for years. But so she and her family now run a foundation. She was freed, of course, and now she and her family run a foundation helping people, doing good work to help people in these situations. All right, so Ballard and Sean Reyes, that is the Utah Attorney General Sean Reyes, announced that O.U.R. and the Elizabeth Smart Foundation were going to merge. The merger was highly publicized in the Utah press, lending O.U.R. more legitimacy. Ballard and Reyes wasted no time peddling this merger for donations. Look at us. We're merging with the Elizabeth Smart Foundation, right? We want to get this. We want to get the smell of legitimacy on us. As a part of the upcoming merger, Elizabeth Smart was put on the board of governors for O.U.R. Her father, Ed Smart, was named O.U.R.'s Director of Prevention and Rehabilitation. So Ed Smart was put over the aftercare of children who were pulled out of rough situations. Shortly after, Ed Smart left Operation Underground Railroad, quote, in disgust. He was dissatisfied with how O.U.R. actually handled the aftercare of purported rescued sex slaves. There's no way to know if they even were that, but we'll tell you in this report too. We'll tell you about where did they go, what is this aftercare, and what's wrong with it. But anyway, for now, Elizabeth and Ed Smart severed all ties with Operation Underground Railroad. They severed all ties with Tim Ballard, terminating the merger. What did Tim Ballard do? He just kept right on going as if nothing had happened, saying that O.U.R. and the Elizabeth Smart Foundation had merged. In a May 2015 press release, O.U.R. announced that their merger with the Elizabeth Smart Foundation was, quote, now official. The only problem is it simply was not true. Here's a little clip, too, from Lynn Packard. Let's listen to this.
It's former FBI Special Agent Greg Rogers who worked child sex trafficking cases for the FBI. He was a guest on the How to Heretic podcast. Rogers said human trafficking has become an industry. It's a very successful way to raise funds, and that Operation Underground Railroad is a very successful money-raising venture. He referred to Reyes's RNC warrior speech. He noted that Reyes raises an immense amount of money talking about human trafficking all the time. But Rogers said Reyes and Ballard speak nonsense. He said human trafficking is real, it's a terrible thing, but it's not happening in the ways these idiots are talking about. Rogers criticizes O.U.R.'s basic concept.
It's just crazy. It's a nonsensical way to approach the problem. And a bunch of private citizens in the United States can't run around the world with AR-15s and act like they're jumping out of planes and going into brothels. I mean, that's not a way to fix this. And if you really understood the problem, they would know that while you may have some success in taking these young children out of these brothels, you've helped those young children you took out that day, but they're replaced the following day. So right. you did nothing to solve the larger problem.
Okay, so let's drill down just for a second on what's happening here, because it's just well known that Tim Ballard with Operation Underground Railroad would take let's see, high value individuals, people who could afford $70,000 let's say fee to go on a mission with Operation Underground Railroad, right? You could pay and go on a rescue mission. Answer me this: what serious extraction unit brings tourists with them, right? If you're a guy and you're in Afghanistan or you're in Iraq or wherever, it's unstable, and someone comes to you and gives you $50,000 and says, I need to get my person out of that embassy today or they're going to die. And that's your job. That's what you do. You're trained for it, and this is how you make your living now. You're not going to take a tourist. You're not going to take someone who's not trained, right? This is not a legitimate organization, right? That's at least it's not legitimate in the sense that they want you to think. All right. But this is not all. On the eve of Human Trafficking Awareness Day, Missy Larson, Vice President of Corporate Communications for doTERRA International, sent out an internal memo addressing concerns about their ties to O.U.R. We'll get to more of this, that story a little bit later, just to show you there's many many organizations and law enforcement agencies, as I mentioned in just a moment, one in particular, that are distancing themselves from all of this. In June of 2021, Lynn Packer reported on criminal investigation that was going on. That was a criminal investigation into Operation Underground Railroad that was expanding. The FBI worked the case. Davis County, Utah District Attorney Troy Rawlings started a criminal investigation into Ballard's organization. And at the time, he said his investigators were dealing with a cascade of evidence and witnesses. O.U.R's chief financial officer and Ballard's sister-in-law, O.U.R, quit O.U.R abruptly and formed her own trafficking charity. But still, even after that, continued to boast about the tens of millions of dollars she administered for O.U.R. Tens of millions of dollars. We found, it took us 15 minutes, and we found an organization that's on the border right now, camped out. They stay in tents day after day. That's how they do this. And they don't take monetary donations. They have a list of items that they can use to help. And one of those items listed were Bibles in Spanish, Bibles that were written in Spanish, so they could give them to the people as they encountered them. That group is called Veterans on Patrol. I haven't vetted them any further than that. I just you can check into that if you want to. If you find something wrong with that organization, let us know. hello@armoroftruth.net. Let us know what you know about this story, if anything. If you've got complaints, you've got something you want to say about it, email us at hello@armoroftruth.net. We'd like to hear from you. Show us where we're wrong. Tim Ballard, while under 3, maybe even 4 separate criminal investigations, still didn't faze him. He contemplated running against Mitt Romney in 2024 for the U.S. Senate, right? And I have to say, it sounds like to me Ballard would fit right in. He would fit right in with the Washington crew. You jump in if you've got something. Jump in. By the way,
you know that we uncovered in the last show that Ballard is part of Trump's.
Yeah, well, that's true too. Yeah, that's a good point. Ballard was on one of the. It was a trafficking advisory board for Donald Trump at some point. Thanks to Innate Ways out there for that $10 super chat.
Yeah, thank you very much, Innate Ways.
That. That's 2 shows in a row, man. We're
on a roll.
Yeah. All right. In Lynn Packer's op-ed about former O.U.R rehab director Ed Smart, when he broke his silence, this was again about the chief financial officer and sister-in-law to Ballard, O.U.R, when she formed her own trafficking charity. While under criminal investigation, let me jump back to Coach here. Let's go to the 445 moment. Let's go to the next piece that Coach wants to give us here. Let's see, 445. All right. So is the story embellished or not? Right? Just because liberal magazines are hating on the movie and hating on the movement and hating on the people, that doesn't mean that they're necessarily wrong, right? If this is your favorite movie and you're going to defend it because it's your favorite movie, it's possible that you might be biased by that for some reason. But let's listen to what Coach says here for a couple minutes.
Care Director Jessica Mass said the organization...
That's not Coach. That's Lynn Packer. Here we go. Here's Coach.
Start with everyone who gave their money in 2 hours and 15 minutes of their life to a story that is at best embellished and, whether intentionally or by coincidence, profiting off conspiracy-fueled mass hysteria. And there is the false credulity that she is speaking of. So we see the attack there. We see the angle there. We identify that. They're saying it's mass hysteria. They're saying it's a story that's built on facts that are not true and that they are embellished. So how true is the movie? MovieWeb has released an expose looking at the credibility of the film. You see here, Sound of Freedom, how accurate is the indie blockbuster to the true story? Subtitle, the surprise summer hit, based on a true story, Sound of Freedom is actually pretty close to reality.
All right, so I'm going to hold it right there because later on in this show, I'm going to show you what Coach is getting ready to talk about here, which is a website that Operation Underground Railroad put out just a couple weeks before the release of the movie, which detailed the scenes that happened the way they depicted them and the ones that didn't. And so hold that right there. But the point is this here. Are these stories embellished? Or are you just mad because it's liberal people saying it about it? Are they embellished? That's the question. So Coach is going to go through what's available on O.U.R's website, and there's something very interesting about what they put out. That was nowhere on their website until a couple weeks before the movie was released. Now, they knew for several months. Now, it's true that the movie sat idle, it was shelved for about 5 years. They wrapped the movie in 2018. They started talks with Angel Studios in the fall of 2022. And then the movie was I think it wasn't until, it was about March of 2023, March of this year, when they knew when the release date was going to be. And that happens to be the time when Tim Ballard stepped down from O.U.R. Why? And it was even after that. It was just a couple weeks before the movie that they put out a page on their website showing here's what was true and here's what wasn't true about the movie. Why did they do that? Were they worried that they were going to get sued? Were there legal concerns for that? Well, how true is the movie? Let's listen to just a bit of Lynn Packer's report here. Let's start right here.
The collapse of Utah journalism is ongoing, and the bottom is not even in sight.
I got the wrong link here. Bear with me 1 second. I'll get this link up here for you. I want you to hear what Lynn has to say. Oh, it's right here. It's right here. Good. We want to get to the 5:12 mark. Yeah, so you're going to hear, let's start it right here.
Now, with the movie finally hitting theaters, its producers have been emphasizing its main plot or storyline. Ballard uncovers his life mission when he's able to free a 7-year-old boy who was kidnapped by ruthless child traffickers. The young boy asks Ballard to find his sister, who was also kidnapped. After rescuing the young boy, Ballard learns the boy's sister is still captive and decides to embark on a dangerous mission to save her. I'll play 2 clips about the main plot, the first from the film's trailer.
American child or one American trafficker. For what reason D.C. would let you within 1 million miles of this? Glamour shots of Miss Cartagena don't count.
She has the girl.
And I say the girl's in Russia. Prove me wrong.
It's over, Tim. Close up. Get on the plane and come back home.
I know it's a true story, and start out with the heart of what pulled you into it.
Tim Ballard, Homeland Security agent, goes down, takes down one of the worst child traffickers in history. Meets this little boy. I won't tell you the story, what happens there, but the little boy asks him a question. Little boy, 5, 6 years old. Imagine, boy says, "Will you save my sister?" So he goes back, talks to his wife, and he essentially sells everything, and he goes and tries to find this little girl.
The main plot is pure fiction. While it is true, Tim Ballard, in 2006, while working as a Homeland Security agent on the U.S.-Mexican border, helped arrest a pedophile named Earl Buchanan and isolate his 5-year-old victim. That's the end of the truth. From there, it's a series of lies, each falsehood getting bigger as the story goes on. Ballard...
Let me jump in here to point out to you that this is not just Lynn Packer's opinion. He's an investigative journalist. He's been at this for a while. There are news reports. Let's see here. For example, These are some of the stories from the Los Angeles Times in July 12th of 2006, for example. Border stop sparks porn molestation case. I probably shouldn't say those words here and killing the video. But these news stories explain what happened and who was involved. So just so you know, here's some evidence in these news stories. Let's see. Bear with me here. I've got a lot of tabs open. Here we go.
Was not the one who rescued the boy. It was a border agent. The boy was not kidnapped, but groomed by a serial pedophile. The boy's sister was not kidnapped by anyone.
So the point here is this is not a trafficking case. Earl Buchanan was not a trafficker. He was a pedophile. You know, and if we get time here in this show, we'll share with you. His son, in an interview, said as much too, and he said his father was a horrible guy, horrible person, even offended on his own sons. But the point here is that it didn't happen the way Ballard says, and this is the main plot line of the movie, and it cannot be corroborated as true in any way. In fact, the evidence shows otherwise. It shows that he wasn't.
Right. And for them to sit around and keep drilling down into this is a true story. This is a true story.
They've doubled down, tripled down on that.
Right.
Yeah.
It's not a true story.
It doesn't appear to be. And you know, we can see from the LA Times reports that just basically what we're talking about here is the origin story of Operation Underground Railroad is false. And the movie is based on the origin story of Operation Underground Railroad. Okay, so a couple more here.
No girl was sold to a Colombian drug lord. No daring rescue ever took place. The question, how true is the story, came up on the movie marketing trail. Ballard, Vrastegui, and Caviezel were asked if the story is true. Not by any experienced news reporters, but by adoring interviewers who asked softball questions and did no fact-checking.
Tim, the movie really starts off with you in progress. It's how true, how much creative license was taken with this script. And the reason I'm asking you, because the story is almost so bizarre, you go, they must have made a lot of this up.
Yeah, no, I'll tell you what, every bad guy is real. In fact, the movie was cut because it was too long. And remember we talked about they had cards at the end telling you every bad guy's real, every kid is real.
I got to pop in for a second. I just want to say, does this sound like the answer of a guy who's confident about his movie? Well, this was true, and this was true, and this is true. This is a true story because this had... No, he's having a hard time just saying anything. Why is that?
And it told you where they are today. Wow. So they had to cut it. It hurt, but it was his fault.
So the story about where we got them and they show you where they are today, all that was cut out, and we can't know. You know, we don't get to know because it had to be cut out because it's a movie, right? We had to cut it out. We just because of time, right? We wanted to get the time down to a certain limit.
This embellished for dramatic purposes in this.
All right, so we did the Count of Monte Cristo. By way of analogy, you have 1,200 pages, 88 characters. Now, people love this movie. We had to get it down to 100 minutes. So I don't have time to show you 10,000 minutes.
Respectfully, Jim Caviezel, Sound of Freedom is not the Count of Monte Cristo. Not in any way. Not in any stretch of the imagination. And he knows that. He knows better.
Of the heroic stuff that Tim Ballard has done. That would be a show that would last for about 15 years. So we had to get it down to...
So let's let Lynn say what I think I was going to say.
The best answer would have been, the main plot in its entirety is fabricated. What about the excuses? The movie got cut because it was too long. We had to get it down. The movie promotion says, torn between his work and his conscience, Ballard decides to go to whatever lengths are necessary to save the boy's sister. He ends up quitting his job and heading straight into the forbidding Colombian jungle, risking his life to liberate her. So just how much was cut from the main plot sequence of events, from the time a boy asked Ballard to save his sister to the time Ballard quits his job to go look for her? Ballard's speeches in his movie infers it was a matter of days between the boy's plea for help and Ballard quitting his job. What actually gets cut is the truth. It was in 2006 that the boy's abuser was arrested and the boy freed. When Ballard actually quit his Homeland Security job, it was in late 2013, 7 years later. Had the boy's 11-year-old sister been kidnapped, she was not. She would have been 18 when Ballard went looking for her.
Now, this wouldn't be a problem if, when asked, they said, yeah, we had to compress the time. We had to compress these years for the movie. That's not what they're saying, folks. Listen, it's a religious movement, right? There is a religion here. We're God's warriors, but we're lying to you. How? How can I? So I'll stop it there at that spot for now. This goes on and on with this, but how true is the movie? Well, we'll give you as much as we can in this report. But the film's main storyline, as I said, portrays Ballard's dramatic rescue of a Honduran girl who had been kidnapped and sold into a Colombian drug lord and trafficker. But as Packer detailed in his report, Sound of Freedom's key plot isn't really true. In fact, the key plot, once again, is what's known as the origin story of Operation Underground Railroad, and it's false. But once you tell a lie long enough and you stick with it, you start to believe it yourself. No girl was kidnapped and sold into slavery, and Ballard didn't risk his life to rescue her, according to what bears out with the evidence in the news reports. Okay, let's see. Back to. All right, good. We got through that section. Okay, Summer, we got through that one pretty quick.
Excellent.
In 2021, Tim Ballard appeared on Glenn Beck's show to disclose that he took 10 kidnapped adult prostitutes who he claims to have rescued from locked cells next to a brothel in an undisclosed country to the White House to meet in secret with then President Donald Trump. Ballard claims the White House provided emergency visas to get the freed hookers out of bondage and into the United States. This is another claim, but let's just jump back into, it's just a strange claim. Let's jump back into Coach here at the 9:57 mark. Forgive us for our sloppiness here in this. There's just so much stuff. I've got like 100 tabs here. It's taking a minute to get to.
100% accurate. Doesn't the truth feel good? Tim Ballard has publicly spoken.
So that was the end of Coach's last segment there. It's 100% accurate. Not according to the LA Times from 2006, who reported on the story that Ballard uses as his origin story for his organization. And anyway, let's move on.
Out about the most recent attacks. This came out yesterday over from our friends at the Western Standard. And they highlight Tim's message here as he says, there is absolutely nothing they won't accuse me of to get you from watching Sound of Freedom. I have at this point been accused of everything but perhaps murder. Expect more lies. Defeat them by watching Sound of Freedom anyway, because God's children are not for sale no matter how much they want them to be. And one of those lies is that people are saying Tim Ballard was having microchips put inside the bodies of the children who were tracked so he can keep up with them. There is no evidence to support that ever happened, and he has denied that vehemently. Another thing that's been used to heavily attack this film is the Q, and especially everything dealing with adrenochrome. We've seen 100 different ways that adrenochrome has been described, but...
And let's just stop there. In our last show, I showed you how, here's the truth. The idea of taking blood from young people and transfusing it into older people as a way to defeat the aging process is definitely a thing. Adrenochrome, the idea behind that is this. If you can excite, it's the blood of young people again, but if you can excite them, in fact, traumatize them, to create rushes of adrenaline and take the blood at that time, then you've got something that's as good as a drug. Apparently, I don't know any more than that. I just know that's the principle. But as Coach goes on to show here, and good on him, there are PubMed papers about this substance known as adrenochrome. It's not a baseless conspiracy theory, right? But this is not what we're interested in. We're not interested in those claims being made by the liberal media. Not relevant. That's all. It's irrelevant, because what we want to show is that there's reason to doubt the story and the message of the people who are giving it to you. Coach goes on here to discuss the bias in the mainstream media, reporting about the reactions of viewers in the theaters, right? One of the reporters was saying that they heard women crying in the restroom after the film, and that it's all hysteria, manipulation, and all that. But Coach is right about his assessment of the liberal media's reports. But where's the substance? Where is the substance in a report like this? Right? There's much more to our world than the mainstream media. We can't just focus on what the liberal media is saying and attack that all day. There's more. There's more to the world. And they're never right. I mean, rarely. So notice which claims that Coach here is focused on. Is this a real search for truth? I don't know. I don't know what Coach is seeking for here, but he must not be aware of the criminal investigations, the years of claims from law enforcement agencies against Ballard and his organization. So to get to that, specifically to that, we'll leave Coach with it now. And I don't know much more about his channel. I'm not trying to do a hit piece on him, but I will, do him the service here. It's called Coach's Archives. He's got 33,000 subscribers. He could use a few more. I'm sure he would appreciate that. If you want to go check out what he's got on his channel. I just wanted to give you an example here of kind of what it looks like when someone is just sort of taking a political position as opposed to actually drilling down for the truth. And what I mean by a political position, let's just read the headlines of the liberal media and show how they're wrong. That you can do that in your sleep. All right, a 5-year-old can do that. All right, so anything before I jump to the next segment here?
Well, I was just
you
saying,
got these points here, right? You want?
Well, you can bring those out.
Summer, she's done research on this as well. Eduardo Verrestegui, he was what was he? He's the producer, former member of Trump's Advisory Commission on Hispanic Prosperity. I thought that was pretty interesting. All right,
the film producer.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah, so we've got all these. The film is the executive producers. Tony Robbins and John Paul DeJoria and John Couch, Patrick Slim and Andrew McCubbins.
Patrick Slim is Carlos's son, right?
Correct. And we went through this in our last video. So if you guys didn't catch that, it's really important that you catch it, because we went into a very deep dive about the people that are funding the film and the people that are connected to the film. And basically these people are people that are involved in Apple. These are people that are involved in Bill Gates and the Clintons.
Yeah.
So why, so that's this whole other layer to this. So for those that have not watched the video that we did before, please check that out.
That's a good point. Yeah, that's worth mentioning here too, that the people funding Sound of Freedom are the same people who want to track and trace you all over the place. Right. Let's say it like this. We don't know who all the people funding it are, because Angel Studios, as far as the distribution anyway, it's not you
the crowdsourcing idea.
Yeah, you can't know who they are. But when it comes down to those billionaires who did fund the making of the movie that's wrapped in 2018, we got a lot of billionaires involved there. A lot of billionaires. Carlos Slim donated to Clinton. He's donated to the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation.
And so his John Paul DeJoria. So he's,
that's Paul Mitchell again.
Yeah, that's Paul Mitchell.
The hair shampoo guy.
So he's out there, he's got his pledge to Warren Buffett and Bill Gates. This stuff is out there and you guys can find it, you just have to put in the time. But it's very dubious who's connected and funding this movie. And We also made the point that, coming into the election season and what's happening with Trump now with January 6th, how they want to put him in prison. So think about that, guys. Like if the quote unquote left progressive movement really wants to get, momentum for putting Trump in prison, right? This movie actually serves to do that. And they are, in fact, backing this film. They are a part of the money that has come in to make this film possible. And for those that say that, they're trying to suppress the film and turn the air conditioner off in the film, and all, that's marketing, guys. That's PR.
Yeah,
that's just pure marketing. It's like the intrinsic thing of if you tell somebody that they can't see something, they're going to want to go out and see it. Curious
point.
George. So this is marketing. Understand that you're being played. This is a piece of propaganda.
That's a great point. I want to tell you about one of the law enforcement agencies who cut ties, did an investigation into O.U.R. and cut ties. And I'll do that in just a moment. But before that, please indulge me for a moment as I invite you to download our mobile app. Take a moment, my friends, please like this video. Hit that thumbs up button if you would.
Or hit the thumbs down if you don't agree.
Hit the thumbs down. That's fine. Please, you can do that too. It all works the same. Share the video. Leave us a comment. Engaging with the video like that really does help. It helps this channel find more viewers, and that's really hard to do because the platform hates us. If you haven't yet, please subscribe. It's free, and it does help. Also, download the Armor of Truth mobile app. It's free, and you're going to get live notifications, direct links whenever and wherever we go live, exclusive content, articles, reports, and resources. The new Tracking Dystopia podcast, episode 2 will be out soon, and a regular Bible study podcast. Right now we're in the book of James. If you could support AOT financially, every donation or gift makes a difference, no matter how much. So use the AOT mobile app Give tab or visit our website, armortruth.net/donate. Follow the links under the description of this video also. If you could set up a recurring monthly donation to help us plan for the future, that really helps us a lot. Hey, what are you waiting for? Download the AOT mobile app now. My name is Brad, and I'm joined by my talented and precious wife, Summer. Together, we are Armor of Truth, and we're seeking a worldview revolution through God's revelation.
Faith is resistance.
It is. Today, definitely, if you're a follower of Jesus Christ, you're the resistance by default. All right, so I promised you I would tell you about, let's not forget this, too. This was important. The Essential Church, folks. There's a QR code for you. If you'd like to get tickets in your area, you can shoot that QR code with your camera on your phone. And it's going to be out on the 28th. This is a film that we're definitely behind, right? This is the Essential Church. Do you want to just say what you know about the movie? Basically what it's about?
Yeah, just it's coming out on Friday, and we really need your support. The true Christian church needs your support more than ever, because the people that show up on that day show the demand. So the more people that come, the more likelihood there is that other theaters are going to open up. And so I just really encourage everybody, like, we've got to travel over 50 miles to get to a theater. So try to make that commitment and show up on the opening day, because it matters. And this is a true, authentic Christian film, and we really respect it. And it's not just a message for Americans. It's a message that's important worldwide. It's got some features about what's happening in Canada and what's happening in Scotland. And it was a victory for the church, and it's very uplifting. So go check it out, essentialchurchmovie.com, and see where the movie is showing in your area.
Yeah, and if you can get tickets before it comes out or be there on the open, it can go to more theaters. It can be released in more theaters. Right now they got 170 plus. And tell you folks, that's a small release. Sound of Freedom was released in over 2,000 theaters. Really wasn't a movie that was being suppressed at all. Right? It was only released domestically, which means the United States and Canada. But it jumped up after a week. It jumped up to over 3,000 like 3,200 theaters. So it wasn't, as many theaters as a standard Hollywood release, but it wasn't really being suppressed at all. Hey, thanks to Brother Rob McTaggart, with a.
He has a question for us in there.
Yeah, he said, thanks for that super chat. Rob says, if you accept Sound of Freedom, that it's a grift at the expense of real victims, you please talk scripture on the question of whether good fruits can come from lies. That's an excellent point, and we definitely will. We definitely will talk scripture here in just a moment. What I'm going to focus in on is humility. Right? Humility is an attribute of perfection, meaning it's an attribute of God, and it's also a fruit of the Spirit. This is what we would expect to see in people. For instance, you remember last night, when we saw that the CBN, Christian Broadcasting Network, was interviewing Tim Ballard. They interviewed him yesterday. Mm-hmm. And everything was standard, same stories. But at the end, the interviewer asked him, I think his name's Billy, he asked Tim Ballard, what do you want your legacy to be? And Tim's answer, it wasn't overly egregious, but it was something like, I just want to know that I've contributed to the solution, or something like that. But, what's the right answer to that question? What do you want your legacy to be when you're gone? Right. The answer to that. What's the answer to that question? That I was faithful to the kingdom. Yeah, it's not about, right? It's not about me. It's about the kingdom. It's exactly. This is not about me. And guys like John MacArthur, you would hear that response. And you'll hear that if you go to see Essential Church movie. So let's move on now. Okay, so we're talking here about the Norman, Oklahoma Police Department. The Norman, Oklahoma Police Department refused, just shut it down, refused a $25,000 donation from Operation Underground Railroad, from Tim Ballard. They refused a donation from Tim Ballard. On October 26th, the Norman Police Department Deputy Chief Ricky Jackson stood before Norman City Council to deliver his final report on his investigation into Operation Underground Railroad, regarding whether or not the City Council would accept a donation of over $25,000 from O.U.R. After the investigation, the same Deputy Chief Jackson had made a complete about-face, saying the Norman Police Department did not want any type of association with O.U.R. Norman City Council then unanimously voted to deny O.U.R.'s donation. What the donation was, it was a donation of a piece of equipment that can, you see, it's very difficult to take information off of a cell phone, specifically an Apple cell phone. The encryption is pretty good, honestly. So there's a device that anyone can buy if you've got the bank to do it. It's going to cost you about $25,000, where you can bypass all the security features and download phone numbers or media that's on the phone. So that's what O.U.R. was donating to the police department, a $25,000 device. But it comes with strings attached. I'll tell you what those strings are in just a moment. It'll come up here in this report, in this section here. Now, Damian Moore, reporting for the American Crime Journal in 2021, speaking about an interview he did in 2020, interviewed two police departments which both accused O.U.R. of defrauding donors and fabricating rescues. All right, look, let me just make this brief. Here's what's happening. As we're running out of time, I'm going to condense this down for you. What's happening is when Operation Underground Railroad gives a police department a donation of funds or equipment like this, they have an agreement. They have a contract that that the recipient of the donation has to sign. And what that contract says is that when you make arrests, human trafficking arrests or pedophile arrests or anything, you have to report those numbers to us. They don't want names, they just want numbers, want raw data. And what Operation Underground Railroad has been doing for years now is using that information and putting it on their tally. So when you see them say, we have rescued over 4,000 or how many ever it was, 3,000 or whatever, children, this is just not true. So both departments that the American Crime Journal was reporting on here, I think one was the Washington State Patrol and the other was the Norman Police Department, received donations from O.U.R. in 2017, but hadn't heard from them since. As of 2021, Tim Ballard and O.U.R. were counting these departments' arrests as their own. Even more troubling, each of these arrests, O.U.R. felt at liberty to add a half dozen victims or so. So they not only took the numbers and made them their own, but they added to them. One provided an article published on O.U.R.'s website claiming that they netted 2 arrests. The article went on to say that 5 children were free due to O.U.R.'s involvement in this particular sting. Now, that's just not truthful. Only problem was there was no children. Both men were busted for child pornography. Man, it's tough to, you never know what the algorithm's going to do. But they were busted for that. They were busted for images. There were no children there. Right? They were distributing stuff online. O.U.R. took elements of a true story and manufactured a human trafficking ring from it. And this has been the case over and over and over. Quote, every bust is a human trafficking ring. They claimed to free more children in just 2 municipalities last year than the entire state reported. It's fiction. Law enforcement doesn't need O.U.R. O.U.R. needs law enforcement in order to make money. So that document I was telling you about is something called the O.U.R. Operation, it's called the Domestic Law Enforcement Support Mutual Agreement for the Receipt of Contributions. It's called the MAD, the M-A-D, the Mutual Agreement for Receipt of Contributions. And it says in this document, it says what they are, what they're doing. It says in here that O.U.R. donors, quote, deserve to be informed regarding how their donations equate to measurables necessary to combat exploitation. By accepting this donation, you agree to provide O.U.R. with numbers of any individuals arrested or victims identified with the assistance of the donation. O.U.R. does not require any names or case identifiers, just raw numbers provided in bi-monthly reports, which O.U.R. will solicit. So this MAD also specifies, quote, where O.U.R.'s contributions support an operation resulting in arrests or other newsworthy activity. Acknowledgement of O.U.R.'s support is requested in associated press releases. He goes on to state that O.U.R.'s media rep will coordinate with the department, with their designated media rep. It turns out when O.U.R. donates to a police department, there are strings attached. In the Norman City Council meeting agenda for October 12, 2021, I think I've got a graphic of that too. So the Norman, Oklahoma City Council got together to have a meeting, and a general meeting, and one of the items on the agenda was to consider this donation from O.U.R. Before they got to before item 10 was finished, let's see here. There we go. Consideration of acceptance. Everyone was curious about this number 11. Consideration of acceptance, rejection, amendment, and or postponement of a donation of a Gray Key digital forensic tool and 1-year service license valued at $25,270.50 from Operation Underground Railroad to be used by the police department for extracting information from iPhone OS devices. Now, let me just jump in here for a minute. Now, Rob, if Rob's still listening, he probably knows something about this, but it's interesting that they're claiming that this device can pull data off of an iOS phone. All they really have to do to make that device obsolete is you do a software update. Just, operating system. I mean, I don't know enough. I was in my research, I found that out. I don't know that off the top of my head, but that's what the people were saying about this. But Ward 1 council member Brandy Studley asked, as a sarcastic confirmation, like, you said you were approached by this company? She's asking Ricky Jackson, the deputy who's there. At first, the deputy was there saying, yeah, we really want this. We got to take this donation. But she had seen this coming up on the agenda, so she did a little research, and she found out these guys are not savory. She read some of the information she was able to gather easily online, as we've been able to gather, about O.U.R. and its founder, Tim Ballard. She said this, quote, he came under investigation and is the subject of several investigative series that details his relationship with corrupt foreign government officials, his history of fabricating rescues and statistics, and several reports detailing accusations by law enforcement agencies, both foreign and domestic, accusing Ballard of fabricating and exaggerating their relationships, including accusations of creating and fostering an environment of trafficking, and evidence detailing that O.U.R. was an ongoing criminal enterprise since its founding, unquote. She went on and said more, though. She said this. She says, quote, what is often overlooked when discussing O.U.R. is their perpetuation of LDS church mythology. So what you find when you get in and you research this is one of the things Tim Ballard is really interested in becoming. He wants to run for office, but he wants to get in. He wants to become a higher up in the LDS church. He wants to proselytize the false Mormon ideology and bring more converts in. Now, that's something as a Christian, we just can't stand back and go, okay, yeah, that's fine. That's not a big deal. That matters. Because look at the amount of support. See, it's not just about supporting people who are trying to save children. You're supporting the Mormon false gospel being disseminated widely. And it's very, very subtle how it's done in the movie as well. We'll get into that here. It's just too much for now. But for even the use of the name Underground Railroad, Operation Underground Railroad, really set some people off. They didn't like that. They used the term cultural appropriation. And I think I agree with it, right? Because, one of the paintings that Ballard had commissioned was of him and his wife and some other people carrying some brown children on a literal railroad with Harriet Tubman, kind of standing in the scene to the side. I don't know. I just wouldn't think that would be a good idea. I probably wouldn't do that myself. But maybe I've done worse. I don't know. But that seems a little over the line. The truth is, there's nothing underground about O.U.R., and they're not abolitionists. Studley shared a quote from an article by Ann Gallagher, who happens to be the nation's leading expert on human trafficking. It said, quote, she said that their raids show, talking about O.U.R., their raids show an alarming lack of understanding about how sophisticated criminal trafficking networks must be approached and dismantled, and called their operations arrogant, unethical, and illegal. The councilwoman went on to say, so I just want to make sure that we all understand who we're getting in bed with here. And I don't think you guys as a police department should want to get in bed with someone like this either. Unquote. So the vote that day was postponed, and when the council met next time on October 26, 2023, the Norman Police Department deputy, again, Chief Ricky Jackson, had to change his tune. And, good on him for realizing the error of his ways and standing up and okay. He said, quote, he appreciated Studley. That Studley brought this before council. He then asked that City Council vote no and refuse Operation Underground Railroad's donation. Jackson went on to tell the Norman City Council, quote, I could not completely feel comfortable going forward with this organization, knowing that there are some concerns out there that could be true. Council member Richard Tortello asked, But what was so disastrous? What's wrong with O.U.R. that we wouldn't want to accept this generous donation from them? Well, we know now, but at the time, the councilman didn't know. Deputy Chief Jackson explained, he's, quote, constituents across the country had several concerns. By constituents, he means other law enforcement agencies and people who've gotten donations from them. So imagine this. In a day where city budgets, right, are extremely tight, raising taxes on citizens who are already weary from several years of insanity, a period of trauma stretched beyond their means financially, people already, they've had enough. Raising taxes on them like this, especially at the city level, you just can't do it right now. But in a time when police budgets have been defunded, police departments are strapped, Norman City Council gave a unanimous no to a big donation. Well, a donation of equipment. They gave a big no to Tim Ballard and Operation Underground Railroad. They could have used any excuse in the world to just go ahead and do business with these guys. No one would have ever known, probably. But there were too many red flags. As has been more common over the last couple of years, the Norman Police Department launched an investigation. After this, they launched an investigation into O.U.R. So why did Tim Ballard leave Operation Underground Railroad? As we heard Coach earlier, he says he doesn't care. Doesn't care why he left. Does it matter? Well, if police departments that have been defunded and are in dire need of resources are not willing to take big donations from this group, from what I think I believe now to be Ballard to be a grifter who has been under multiple investigations and received various allegations of fraud since his organization started, is it really very hard to figure out why Tim Ballard had to step down from O.U.R. Right? You've got law enforcement agencies. See, the way their business model works is that they use the data that law enforcement agencies create and make it look like they did it. So if that starts to go away, then their business starts to fail. Not only that, the criminal investigation is clear why. It's very clear why Ballard had to step down. We played a video in the last show where Ballard was describing why he stepped down. He said it was the right time. I want to be independent and start my own. No, he was lying. He had to step down. Right? He was compromised. O.U.R.'s facade is crumbling. Tim Ballard has been exposed, as has his friend and protege, sadly, Jim Caviezel as well. What are they doing that's so wrong, some might ask? Since the revelation of multiple criminal investigations into Ballard and O.U.R., their reputation has rapidly diminished due to their so-called partnerships with law enforcement agencies. O.U.R. would make such a donation to a law enforcement agency, as mentioned above, like the one to the Norman Police Department, and then they would claim direct involvement in these major stings and arrests by the arrest that those departments made. That is a scam. That's a scam, folks. That's a scam to make it seem as if Tim Ballard's organization was making the arrest. Was a similar concern echoed by Chris Loftus of the Washington State Patrol. He told Vice News last December, quote, candidly, in an organization of our size, this is the Washington State Patrol, and an organization of our size and that has a total multi-year budget well into the billions, it's not significantly budget impacting what O.U.R. gives to them. We're quite comfortable with our decision to forego any further donations from them and avoid further association with an organization that might provide a distraction from our core mission. That from a human trafficking division. O.U.R.'s claim, their claim to fame, was their association with MECTF, that is the Missing and Exploited Children's Task Force. And the former head of Washington State Patrol's Missing and Exploited Children's Task Force, Carlos Rodriguez, was the head of the MECTF, when beginning in 2015, O.U.R began donating funds directly to support that task force. Between 2015 and 2020, O.U.R had given an average of $31,000 per year to support the task force operations. Keep in mind, this is during a period when O.U.R had jumped in donations from $1 million to $47 million in 2020 in donations. Well, so they were given less than a fraction of a percent of their annual income in any given year to this law enforcement organization, and it was so they could claim their statistics. They could access these numbers, right, and claim them as their own. After the loss of O.U.R's former president of operations, John Lyons, Tim Ballard scrambled to regain these so-called partnerships with domestic law enforcement agencies. A desperate and shameful attempt to obtain credibility and give the appearance of legitimacy to an illegitimate scheme. So as any scam artist and grifter would do during desperate times, they go into damage control. They create an alternate reality and live by alternative facts. Ballard, who once distanced himself from QAnon and their human trafficking fantasies and delusions. Now, by the way, I'm quoting from American Crime Journal here, just so you know. But he now fully embraces it, it would seem. He'll say in public he doesn't know what QAnon is. It seems by what he says, he's very much aware of it. He's aware that there's a market there. Right? You've got 80 million Trump voters. That's a market. He is now associating with figures, began perpetuating a lot of the theories. But even though O.U.R rakes in tens of millions of dollars per year now, Ballard tithes donor money. Tithes, according to American Crime Journal. And their articles are, they have their sources in their articles. They report that Ballard donates, he tithes to the LDS Church, he tithes donor money. Right? Even though he makes quite a lot himself, he tithes from the donor pot to the LDS Church. These schemes by Ballard have never been about trafficking or Christians in Afghanistan. Tim believes he's a prophet and seeking to get a spot in LDS leadership. It's been he thinks that he's part of some revelation, right? That all of this is about some message and mandate that God gave him years ago. Well, it makes a good story. But most law enforcement agencies that work with O.U.R have cut ties with them, as both O.U.R and Ballard are under multiple criminal investigations. But they have remained silent on that issue. If you hear Tim Ballard interviewed today, and you'll hear more, you won't hear him say anything about this. It'll just address the things that Coach was addressing in his video. Let's look at the mainstream news, the liberal media articles, and we'll just dump on that, but we won't talk about this. All right. Now, what's interesting too is Lynn Packer goes on to report too that there was a grand jury called to investigate O.U.R. And Ballard has powerful friends in Washington. What's interesting is that grand jury was mysteriously terminated. Something that doesn't happen. Right? Before the evidence could be presented, the grand jury was shut down. Now, what a grand jury is for? A grand jury is when the district attorney brings charges. They bring together a jury of your peers together to determine whether or not there's a case there. It's not where you get to defend yourself, so defendants are not even present here. It's just to decide whether or not to go forward and have a trial. Somehow that was terminated. And let's see, Lynn Packer has a report on that too. I'll skip that for now, just in the interest of time. Okay. there was this too. There was the infamous white paper issue. Now, this is a rendering of what Ballard had put together on a whiteboard. This is why the grand jury was convened, to find out whether or not charges should be pressed or whether or not they should have a trial. He should be tried for crimes here. What you see here is interesting. This is sort of a secret plan to monetize a nonprofit organization, Operation Underground Railroad. Ballard wanted to use his plan not only just to monetize his organization, but to then also proselytize prospective converts for the Mormon Church. Let me get you like a... So there's the actual whiteboard, so you can see this is what we're talking about. There we go. So what you see here is a collection of websites and just a lot of nonprofits, right? Where the donations would end up going into a for-profit corporation. Now that's money laundering. That's called money laundering, right? We are a nonprofit here. This is, we know very well, this is something you can't do this, right? Money that comes in to support your work. When you donate to us, it goes back into this. It doesn't go out to some investment to enrich us, or it goes back into doing this and studio and making us able to buy equipment and do this show and things in that of that nature. We don't loan money. You can't loan money. We can't invest donor funds. So this is illegal. In August 2019, Ballard summoned his most trusted O.U.R. associates and partners to a clandestine meeting that required each individual to sign a non-disclosure agreement. It was at that meeting that Ballard laid out this plan to monetize his nonprofit by setting up an illegal strategy to funnel donations into his own bank account and to proselytize for the Mormon Church. And as you can see, the movie Sound of Freedom is listed on here too. On this whiteboard, he presented this strategy. Each member's role and the respective organizations, such as the Nazarene Fund, Children Need Families Fund, the Liberty and Light Equity Trust, and many others, funneling donor money into his for-profit organization called Slave Stealers, LLC. Right? This is how to launder donor money each step of the way by creating a labyrinth of nonprofits and for-profits that would be exchanging money. Now, if his plan was to work and progress, he'd be able, what he wanted to do was to funnel enough liquid cash into his personal bank account so that he could then open low-cost LDS orphanages in Haiti, the ones that already existed. Ballard estimated he could make about $20,000 per adoption. Right? So part of this scheme was to adopt Haitian kids to LDS families and charge them $20,000 per adoption to Mormon couples in America. Several of those in attendance at this meeting left, angry and disgust, including the O.U.R. former O.U.R. major donor, financer, millionaire Paul Hutchinson, and O.U.R. Ops, one of the operation team leaders, Dave Lopez. Unknown by Ballard until this report came out, his criminal conspiracy, the witnesses and the whiteboard are part of the Davis County District Attorney's criminal investigation into Operation Underground Railroad and its founder and CEO, Tim Ballard. And also investigation into Utah Attorney General Sean Reyes. Reyes was one of those high-value individuals, that went on in operations with the group. Now, Ballard, obviously fearing a widening criminal investigation by the FBI and the IRS and the international authorities, didn't cut his losses. He just threatened to retaliate. So he doubles down, triples down again. Again, coming into 2020, man's riding high. No one's challenging him. Everyone thinks they're legitimate. No one questioned their claims, and there wasn't any critics to be found. But it was the beginning of the end. And when you get down to the O.U.R. origin story, the sole rescued survivor that Tim Ballard touted publicly as the O.U.R. poster child, a girl who was given the name Liliana, right? And let's see here. I forgot this story too. They offered merch that was supposedly designed by her. You know, this was someone who had been rescued, apparently. Turned out to be a fabrication too. O.U.R. had no involvement in her rescue, nor her aftercare. It didn't stop Ballard from peddling the story, their high-risk rescue of her and fabricating her aftercare costs before Congress. Right? He told this story before Congress and in a White House meeting. The LDS Church's publishing wing had published Ballard's American Covenant series, this book, that wasn't a huge hit with the LDS community. So the idea was then to begin to exploit the evangelical community to make a profit. While there's no definitive proof, evidence suggests that these connections gave Tim Ballard an opening to exploit the LDS Church and Glenn Beck's community using human trafficking as context. Due to Tim Ballard's employment with the U.S. Department of Homeland Security, Elder Ballard from the LDS Church, no relation, had asked him to help locate a Haitian child named Marty Gardy, M-A-R-D-Y, G-A-R-D-Y, Marty Gardy. Marty Gardy was kidnapped in 2009. Even since then, Ballard has misled Gesno Gardy, the father, and the LDS Church with needless, flamboyant raids, some based entirely on psychic leads. We covered on Friday night that O.U.R. has used psychics before. This is one of the places where they use psychics to try to find Marty Gardy in Haiti. Right? Ballard's not a dummy, right? He's an educated guy, right? He worked for the Department of Homeland Security. He knows better, but anything to keep the gimmick going. Right? Once you get so deep in, I guess you feel like you can't stop. There's not a single documented case of law enforcement employing a psychic that solved a cold case, identified a criminal, or found a missing person anywhere ever. But there are dozens of instances in which corrupt detectives and con artists embezzled money under the ruse of something like this. Ballard and O.U.R. have received millions of dollars and have not produced demonstrable results outside of creating this artificial demand. Ballard and O.U.R. have not utilized, also have never done an independent audit of their organization's funds. So imagine, but think about this for a minute. Think about this organization where you've got, I don't know, a dozen guys or more going into third world countries, right? White guys running around in the barrios or the ghettos of these third world, Central American, or South American countries. Dirt poor, corrupt communities. And you got these white guys running around asking for children, asking for girls, little girls. All this happening in countries that are run by corrupt leaders, specifically Haiti. As law enforcement and human trafficking experts pointed out, crusader organizations like O.U.R. primarily operate in corrupt nations with civil unrest as, quote, they bribe officials and do whatever they want. During multiple interviews with current and former advocates working in the field of rescuing orphans. Operation Underground Railroad fabricated rescues and claimed these organizations were their aftercare facilities. So now we finally get around to one of the big questions about O.U.R. or about Sound of Freedom is what happens to children after they're rescued? Where do they go? What kind of aftercare do they get? Well, the only problem is no children were rescued to start with. But over 3 months, Damian Moore interviewed nearly 24 current and former employees and volunteers of orphanages and rescue groups, most who were at the director level of the organization that Ballard or O.U.R. had falsely claimed to have rescued children and placed with them in their orphanages. Right? Once again, O.U.R. donates money to an orphanage somewhere way out there, and they take the stats. How many children do you have? Okay, we rescued all those kids. And they called that aftercare. Not a single one of these people would go on record. But one of the organizations, one of the leaders, one of the directors did go on record. And this orphanage, this organization's budget was already $70,000 in the hole. Staff, volunteers, and their friends and family just tried to help cover the expenses by maxing out their credit cards. These things, this goes on and on. There's just not enough time to cover it here today. The truth is important, but one of the quotes was, the truth is important, but we can't risk failing these kids. Many of O.U.R.'s donors are also our donors, right? So they don't want to speak out against Ballard because they don't want to lose the money. All right, so let's see. Let me get to the part here. Yeah, here's one of the, we talked about this earlier. Can you imagine any kind of real commando team that brings tourists along with them? O.U.R. has been called, by some, has been called a club for middle-aged white guys to live out their James Bond fantasies. Now, American Crime Journal reported this. They said, we spent at least 40 man-hours searching on the internet for information of Operation Underground Railroad, their missions, rescues, and searched for rescued survivors and their families, who thanked O.U.R. Out of 3,000, that's the number at the time that they claimed they had rescued. Out of 3,000 rescued children, there hasn't been a single thank you from the survivor or the survivor's family. Not a single piece of neutral or critical media on Tim Ballard or O.U.R., before the movie Sound of Freedom. For an organization to have rescued 4,000, 5,000 kids, not a single thank you from a parent of a rescued child. In fact, not a single O.U.R. rescued child went home. Where they go is to some mysterious aftercare program where there's no oversight. You can claim anything you want, especially if you have enough money to shut down people. Of the hundreds of criminals arrested, who Tim Ballard reported to be, MS-13 gang members, men connected to or trafficking children on behalf of cartels and everyday pimps, not a single former colleague with Homeland Security has come forward verifying his numerous claims during his time with the agency. And Ballard enlisted Utah's most powerful law firm, Curtin McConkie. Now that's the LDS Church's longtime go-to legal attack dog, who's known for how do we say this on YouTube? For shielding people in cases of abuse, for example. Or Curtin McConkie also tried to silence the American Crime Journal, which is really a small-time blog Right? They tried to silence them. And at the same time, Tim complains about cancel culture. But as Damian Moore writes for ACJ, he says, if we weren't onto something, they wouldn't have been watching. They wouldn't care. Worse, Ballard claims he was appointed by God to save the children. He knowingly hires a law firm that proudly, how do we say this, ran a catch and kill scheme that silenced abuse victims, put them under restrictive non-disclosure agreements. Little children, some of them toddlers who've been abused repeatedly. And it happens also that the LDS Church was accused of using a victim's hotline to hide the abuse. This one goes on. The idea here is that you set up a hotline, right? So the LDS Church sets up a hotline. Anyone who has reports of abuse, call this hotline and let us know. But the average person, the congregation can't call. Only the bishop can call. So you have to tell the bishop, and then the bishop calls the hotline. But the hotline doesn't go to some organization who's working to help the people. It goes to this law firm. And what the purpose is it's just gathering information so they know how to get out ahead of the claims. It's here's another example of what we talked about earlier. Despite numerous criminal investigations into Ballard and O.U.R, allegations of fraud, even accusations of sex abuse, both of female staff and volunteers, and of rescue targets, and exploitation of minors by O.U.R operatives and sometimes volunteers who paid up to $70,000 or more for a week-long vacation package that allows, Sean Reyes, Attorney General of Utah, for example, and some women went along too, to live out their Jason Bourne fantasy, right? To go on an operation. And this is how Ballard has brought in $47 million in 2020, anyway. Mormon myths, fraud, loss of every single staff member that brought O.U.R credibility, and over 24 police agencies minimizing or cutting ties with Ballard. Things are not always what they seem. Things are not always what they seem. In 2020, Tim Ballard and O.U.R's facade cracked. From details of the whiteboard meeting emerging to rumors that O.U.R's longtime chief financial officer, Tim Ballard's sister-in-law, was possibly cooperating with law enforcement agencies. Credible allegations of sexual assaults, operatives bragging about cocaine and alcohol-fueled parties in foreign nations with girls of their choosing. Accusations, just worse accusations. I don't even want to read them here. Bribing corrupt Haitian government leaders, numerous criminal investigations in the United States. Ballard's, he's doubling down. He's sticking to his story, even though he had to leave his organization. And is anybody asking why? Despite all of this, even in the middle of the scamdemic, he still brought in $47 million in 2020. So let me share this with you. We talked about earlier, Rob made a good point. Let's get to the biblical. How do we think about this as Christians? Well, I want to talk to you about humility. We'll use Proverbs 18 as a foundation here. We'll look at Proverbs 18 and look at some other scriptures. But keep this in mind. I'll say it again. Humility is an attribute of perfection. Humility is one of God's attributes. It's a fruit of the Spirit. This is something that we should display. So Proverbs 18, we'll go to start with verse 2. A fool takes no pleasure in understanding, but only in expressing his opinion. A fool takes no pleasure in understanding, only in expressing his opinion. To love truth is to have a willing and teachable spirit. The fool is chatty and vain and finds no fulfillment in eternal truths. The fool creates complicated arguments and defenses rather than living in the truth. And he does this to show how clever he is. This shows that the fool is focused on self, not God, not a warrior for God. Jeremiah 11:8 says, "Yet they did not obey or incline their ear, but everyone walked in the stubbornness of his evil heart." So the shameful folly of these movements flows from the misplaced priority and seeking of approval and, taking satisfaction from the wrong place. Verse 4 of Proverbs 18 says, "The words of a man's mouth are deep waters, but the fountain of wisdom is a bubbling brook." What does that mean? The words of a man's mouth are deep waters, but wisdom is a bubbling brook. That means truth is simple. You don't have to remember your story when you're telling the truth. Truth is not complex. Right? There's also the idea, don't pay attention to myths and endless genealogies. Titus 1, where Paul is instructing Timothy, speaking in context about men who speak for God as if they have authority, but only deceive. Titus 1 verse 10 says, "For there are many who are insubordinate, empty talkers, deceivers, especially those of the circumcision party." So in this context today, that would mean even Christians that do this, professing Christians. So in this text here, there are many who are insubordinate. This English word that we read as insubordinate is translated from Paul's original Greek term, a word that meant the opposite of submission. So these men that we're talking about here, they're the opposite of being submitted to God. An insubordinate man is unruly. He's unsubdued. Right? He doesn't know when to quit. And he will not submit to God's order of authority. There are many who claim to be of the true faith who are not. They are a problem, but they make themselves known to those who are grounded in truth by their, right? So if you're grounded in the eternal wisdom of God's word, you will see through these people. You will see them, you'll know them by their fruits. You'll know them by their unwise speech, by their deception. And first and foremost, you'll know them by their confused doctrines. Jim Caviezel stands right beside Tim Ballard, and they both say they're warriors for God, but they have different gods. This is how you know when you know something's wrong here. They proclaim a religion. They proclaim a God and worship. They proclaim a kind of worship that produces no true righteousness. For all their many words, for all their tear-jerking stories and claims that they're called by God, none of it brings anyone one step closer to God. And that's because it's founded in error from the start. When you start out from a position of error, you can't work your way back to truth. Your foundation has to be built on the rock. And that rock in that scripture means obedience. Many professing Christians promote this same kind of false righteousness as well. And when I say professing Christians, there's a difference in professing the faith and possessing the faith. Now that's R.C. Sproul. That's not mine. But that's something to always keep in mind. Someone who says they're a Christian, that doesn't really mean anything. Or someone who says they're a warrior for God, it means nothing, right? Evil is marching across the United States today. It's not a time for us to be on the couch in the background. We got to be engaged, because movements like this are just taking it and running with it. And everybody, people who don't know better are like, oh, well, look at these Christians in their movie. There's no Christians there. It's more accurate for us to call these men unbelievers rather than insubordinate Christians, because they show by their actions, by their fruits, their actions and words, that they don't know the true living God. They're persuading hundreds of thousands, and eventually it will be millions, that the simple story of salvation through Christ and the cross is not enough. But that to be really wise and to be truly good, to be a warrior for God, you need to affirm these stories. And you need to support their movement and all its elaborate tales and theories, or You're godless. So, to follow up on what Rob said, left for us in the chat earlier. Yeah. Can good come from lies? It is true that God can use anyone and does. Nebuchadnezzar, right? Belshazzar. He used Ahab. The Old Testament is full of broken both men of the Israelites and godless pagans. Cyrus, right? King Cyrus is a godless man. Well, false god. But the Lord used him. Yeah, the Lord can use godless people, but goodness doesn't flow from lies. To answer what Rob was saying, can lies be good somehow? Well, here's the biblical concept. From the root to the fruit, right? A rotten root isn't going to produce a good fruit. Right? So a lie isn't going to produce a truth. The faith that these men profess is rooted in humanism, really, with a big influence of mysticism. Now, Ballard is influenced obviously by the LDS Church, but Jim Caviezel is influenced by something probably more common. Humanism with mysticism. That's really Catholicism. But it doesn't honor Christ. Titus 1:11 says, they must be silenced, since they are upsetting whole families by teaching for shameful gain what they ought not to teach. Now, it is true in context. Paul is talking to Titus here. He's training him up to train elders. But this application can be made to men who are standing up in the culture on TV as important people in our society and making claims that they're warriors for God. They're preaching some kind of doctrine, right? We've got to save these people. Verse 12 says, therefore rebuke them sharply, that they may be sound in the faith. You don't rebuke them sharply because you hate them. You rebuke them sharply because you care about them, because the way they're going is straight for hell. So if you rebuke them sharply, then they have a chance of being sound in the faith. Somebody has to tell the person the truth. Paul's training Titus here that he's going to train the elders of the church to simply shut up these problem people, because they should not be listened to. Otherwise, they'll subvert whole households. They're not to be silenced by violence or persecution or anger, but by the truth in love, by reasoning from the scriptures. The Apostle Paul in Acts 17, when Paul and his crew came into Thessalonica, verse 2, Paul reasoned with them from the scriptures, explaining and proving this Jesus, whom I proclaim to you, is the Christ, is the anointed one, is the Savior. In 1 Timothy chapter 1, verse 4, Paul warned Timothy with the same message he gave Titus. Do not listen to fables and endless tales that do not cause godly edification and faith. You can't get a good fruit from a rotten root. There's certain spiritual subjects that are not edifying and are not profitable. In my opinion, the whole movement around Sound of Freedom is one of those spiritual subjects that is not edifying and is not profitable. Not profitable for learning, as the scriptures defines profitable. All they do is cause endless speculations. Titus and Timothy were commanded, when they found men proclaiming such things, that they were supposed to stop it. The most common and plainly obvious problem about this kind of person is that when he's motivated, or is that he is motivated by personal gain. Dishonest financial gain, that's bad enough. However, some of these people seek dishonest gain from the name of God. I've seen Ballard do it. I've seen Caviezel do it. I've seen many people associated with the movement do it. profiting in their pride from others who acknowledge and admire them as some kind of spiritual leader. Titus 1:16 says, they profess to know God, but they deny him by their works. They are detestable, disobedient, and unfit for any good work. I'm not saying that. I'm not saying that. That's the word of God. They profess to know God, but they deny him in their works. They are detestable, disobedient, unfit for any good work. So there's the answer to the question. Can something good come from deception? The idea here is that these people have been polluted by idolatry. They're clouds without water. They're counterfeit leaders. They're cowardly soldiers who will ultimately fall. They will fail. They are unfit for the calling that they profess. These men are dangerous because they sound like Christians when they speak. They profess to know Christ, but in their deeds deny him. Folks, we cannot simply go by what a person says to us. As Christians exercising biblical discernment with the Holy Spirit as our guide, we must, it's not a choice, not an option, we must evaluate their words and their deeds. We have to make judgments. Judge their words and their deeds. But judge their words and deeds according to eternal standards, not worldly standards. Right? What Ballard is claiming to do in the world, rescuing kids, that's a good thing in the world, isn't it? It sounds so like the guy at the top of the show, right? Maybe I should play that again for those who weren't here at the top. Let me just play at least a little bit of this so you can hear. This is kind of a standard. It's kind of a standard.
How can I say this and not
kind of a standard comment from someone who is supporting the movie at all costs, and anyone who doesn't support it is godless.
Get upset and not get real hype. If you don't support Tim Ballard in the movie Sound of Freedom, me and you have nothing to talk about. Tim Ballard's like a big brother of mine. I talk to him on the phone. I text message. He calls me right back. He texts me right back. That's one of my heroes. He is sent from God. He is sent from the Lord to change the world. And you know what? That's why all these people are coming at him. Because when God sends you on a mission to change the world, people have to try to find something to tear you down. How could you tear this man down for saving children? How? Quit listening to everybody out there in the world say, oh, these Christians came with this movie, Sound of Freedom. They're cashing in, blah, blah, blah. What?
Yeah. So how can you? How can you godless heretic, how can you not support this movie? See what we mean? Tim Ballard's charitable movement, my friends, is a snipe hunt. It's a red herring. It is a waste of time. But not only that, it's also catastrophic to the souls of many people. These men pretend to have a higher spirituality than those who question them. That's kind of what we're hearing. I don't mean to call out this man here. I don't know who he is. This is a good example. But the men here in this movement, they pretend to have a higher spirituality than those who question them, right? If you bring a charge against them, well, you're not one of God's warriors. We can and we must see through this facade. If we have no eternal standard for determining wickedness from righteousness, then we're going to be left to measure things by our feelings. And that's what's happening here. Right? This kind of story brings all kinds of feelings. And when you feel this strongly about something, you don't want anybody to say anything against it. You'll protect it. But our feelings are the most unreliable thing about us, my friends. You can't trust your feelings, and you know it. Your feelings are going to change 15 times a day. Well, that's me. Maybe I'm unusual. Your feelings are going to change a couple times a day. You can't trust your feelings. We're fallen. The body, the mind, all of it is fallen. It can only be redeemed through Christ. and with the Holy Spirit indwelling you, then you have the ability to discern truth from error. It doesn't just happen magically. You have to seek truth in God's word first. That's where your foundation for truth comes from. And then you're able to test things properly. Christianity is not mysticism. It is a reasonable faith. But your feelings are not to be relied upon. They're very easily played by opportunists who know how to persuade you and other people to support their movement. What we're talking about here, what we see from like this gentleman here, people who are supporting this movement, Coach earlier, and the guys, this is a disordered ambition. They're pushing hard for something that's ultimately fruitless. It's fruitless because there's no gospel there. It's just about my good deeds. Look at me. Look at my good works. Right? So it's a disordered ambition. The movement is a disordered ambition. And the people who support the movement have a sort of misplaced compassion. So disordered ambition and misplaced compassion creates a storm of confusion. Proverbs 18:12 says, before destruction, a man's heart is haughty. Right? That's pride before a fall. But humility comes before honor. Before destruction, a man's heart is arrogant, prideful. But humility comes before honor. Pride comes before a fall, but humility is seen in those who honor Christ. Remember, humility is an attribute of perfection. That is to say, humility is an attribute of God. We want to be like our God. Charles Spurgeon said, humility is to think of yourself, if you can, as God thinks of you. He also said, there is no wisdom in a self-exaltation. Other vices have some excuse because, men can gain by some other vices. Avarice, pleasure, lust have some plea, but the man who is proud sells his soul cheaply. He opens wide the floodgates of his heart to let men see how deep the flood within his soul. Then it all suddenly flows out, and all is gone, and all is nothing. For one puff of empty wind, one word of sweet applause, of admiration, and the soul is gone, and not a drop is left. Thank you, my friends, for joining us. My lovely wife, Summer, had to leave for an appointment, so I want to thank her for joining me here today. I want to thank all of you for joining me, and thank you guys for those super chats today. We really appreciate it. If you'd like to support us, there are links in the description with that. By all means, please download the Armor of Truth mobile app. It is free, and it's going to be the way for us to be in touch with you and communicate with you and provide you content that we simply cannot put up here on YouTube. God bless you, my friends. We'll see you again here next time.
Well, that's a rather interesting position coming from a man on a crusade against the evils of technology.
I'm not against technology, Doctor. I'm against the men who deify it at the expense of human truth.
Armor of Truth, live.
In the age of technocracy, scientism, and pop atheism,
faith is resistance.
Nietzsche, of course, announced the death of God and called for the birth of the Übermensch, the Superman, who would take humanity to new heights and to create a new world order.
Find us at the Armor of Truth YouTube channel and log on armoroftruth.net.